welcome to Stories of Hope. I'm Christine Hotchkiss. Each week I bring you stories of inspiration, education, and stories of hope that will change you for sure. Before we get started, I want to say thank you to my studio sponsor, the Motivated Mind Group, your local creative agency. Today my guest is Matt Ode. He is a 5-year stage 4 testicular cancer survivor, and he's going to tell us all about his journey. He's also a motivated speaker, and I will get more information as to where you can find him. Please help me welcome my guest today, Matt Ode. Hey, Matt.
Hello. How you doing? It's good. Finally good to connect again, Christine, so thank you.
Yeah, we were just talking about this a few minutes ago, that we actually connected a couple of years ago, right at probably around the pandemic time, when we were all sitting in front of our computers and had nothing else to do but try to connect with new people, right?
Absolutely.
And you were one of them, and it was a referral that I am definitely glad that I got to. So, stage 4 testicular cancer survivor and a motivated speaker. So let's start from the very beginning. I don't know anything about this particular cancer. So tell me, where were you and how did you get diagnosed?
Yeah, great question. So we'll go all the way back to 2016. So I actually love starting my journey with how I met my now wife, which is actually important in the whole journey and story behind this. But I met her on St. Patrick's Day of 2016. And at the time, I was a wellness instructor, a personal trainer. Basically health was like really my lifestyle. It was everything that I wanted to help people with. And, as I met Lauren that night, we started dating a few months later, and as the summer progressed, we were doing activities such as hiking, kayaking, you name it, and all of a sudden I started to get these minor back pains. And at 24 years old, by the way, I was 24, I'm 30 years old now, and I just was like, I'll shrug it off. I'll be fine. There's nothing to worry about. When you're young and you're a healthy individual, the last thing you're ever going to think about is cancer or anything in that realm. So I just kept shrugging it off and kept letting it, kind of be in the back burner. And all of a sudden, the back pain and other aches and pains got worse and worse. And as stubborn as I was, I wouldn't go to a doctor. And all of a sudden, a few months later, I got to the point where I could barely walk, but what actually got me to go to the hospital was I ended up waking up and puking up blood one night. Oh. I got rushed to the emergency room. They did a blood test on me. They found out that I had lost 2/3 of the blood circulating in my body, and they had no idea what was causing it. So I immediately got rushed into an emergency surgery. They gave me 6 bags of blood, and the next morning I wake up and I think I'm ready to go home. I'm feeling better, and I'm just with my parents, but I saw that my parents were kind of distraught. And then all of a sudden my doctor walks into the recovery room and he has this blank stare in his eyes, and he walks over to me, sits down, he grabs my hand and he goes, "Matt, we have found an 11-centimeter tumor in your small intestine. We know it is cancerous. We don't know what type yet, and we have to rush you to the main campus of the Cleveland Clinic immediately." So I'm from Cleveland, Ohio, and I was at a local hospital at the time. And within that day, they had to find a room, get me in an ambulance, and rush me over to the clinic where they could do testing to figure out what type of cancer I had, because it was spreading so quickly.
Wow. And you're only 24 years young, where we think we're invincible at that age, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
absolutely.
Before I even go any further, I want to say thank you to anyone such as myself. I'm a blood donor, and here's a perfect example as to why I do what I do for people like you, and that makes me feel good. We never know who's going to get our blood, but we know that someone's going to get it. So what ended up happening after that?
Yeah, so I'll go to the emotional side of all of it. So as soon as I was diagnosed, it was just me, my parents. My wife, Lauren, had no idea at that time. By the way, we were technically only dating for 2 months. We had met back in St. Patrick's Day, but it's now August, but we started dating around June. And, all I could think of was, how do I stay strong for my parents? How do I stay strong for Lauren and all, everyone else that's going to receive this news? And instead of me saying, well, what about myself? I didn't think about me at all. And I think for a lot of us, for me, especially as a man and a male, I felt like holding in my emotions was the right route to go so I could be a strong individual, so that I didn't have my vulnerable state by, crying or letting go of how I truly felt in the time. And that was actually the complete opposite of what I should have done. And I'll say this is my one piece of advice to a lot, especially males. Women, you women are usually a lot better at this than us. But I know some, women have a difficult time expressing this as well. But just being able to be vulnerable and sharing how you feel to somebody that you can know, like, and trust. And that was either Lauren or my parents at the time. And finally, after a few days when I was in the clinic, they did, no joke, probably 30, 40 different tests on me. That is when they found out I had stage 4 testicular cancer. What they called it was stage 3C, but it's the same thing as stage 4. Stage 4 is what my oncologist said, like, there isn't really a stage 4 when it comes to testicular cancer. It's called stage 3C, but I just call it stage 4 because that's what it was. So what had happened, they found out that it had originated in my testicle, but I never had any swelling, which was kind of weird, because most testicular cancer patients, that is their first symptom, is swelling or some type of abnormal effects that happen down in that region. But for me, it was more or less just the back pain, and that's why I kind of just shrugged it off. And so after they figured that out, that's when I started having family and friends kind of flooding in. And at the time, Lauren finally arrived about a day later to come and see me. And I just remember having this flood full of emotion because I didn't know she was still going to be with me. I didn't know if she wanted to leave because of, all this tragedy that had happened in my life. But I just remember we locked eyes, we started crying, we started hugging each other. And that was my first moment of vulnerability and letting my emotions go. So it was almost like a weight of just all of this, baggage that was on my shoulders lifted off of me. And I can now focus on, instead of holding in my emotions, I could focus on what are the next steps to healing myself. And I knew she was going to be, kind of my angel and, along this whole journey. And so were my parents and, a lot of other people as well.
Now, if I remember correctly, when we talked a couple of years ago, you actually were given 24 different diagnoses. Could you give us a few of what those were? Because that's quite a few.
Yeah. So I don't know about 24.
Okay.
But when you talk about diagnosis, do you mean just like what I guess what I was saying was there was about 24 different tests that kind of led to that diagnosis. So there was a ton of different testing. So what they ended up doing was they did multiple different tests on me. I mean, they did anything from an ultrasound to blood work to they did when I went for the surgery, they did CT scan. They did you name it. They did a ton of different tests. And then finally, it was actually the ultrasound that is where they found where it originated. And that's maybe where you're kind of referring to. So it was a multiple test, but the diagnosis was just, it was stage 3C testicular cancer. I forget the exact type, because there's different types of testicular cancer, of how they form, how they originate. Mine was not, I know it was non-seminoma, and there might have been some other terms to it, but they then put me on what's called BEP, which is bleomycin, etoposide, and cisplatin. And that is 3 really, really potent chemotherapy drugs to help eliminate all of the cancer. And that was really, really challenging for me because I went on it the day they found out I had testicular cancer. They put me directly on it. And, I went everything from losing my hair within a couple of weeks. I was extremely fatigued. Basically, anybody on chemotherapy, I had all the symptoms, nauseous, couldn't really get out of bed a lot of the days. And, for me being this healthy 24-year-old, where the last thing I ever thought was going to be this diagnosis with cancer, to now having all of these challenges in my life, not only was it physically taxing on me, but it was mentally draining as well. And one of my favorite sayings I tell people is, everything in life happens for you, not to you. And what I mean by that is, yeah, you're going to have unfair situations. Life is not fair in so many ways. But it's not about the situation. What it's about is how you deal mentally, emotionally with the situation. Are you going to say, why is life happening to me? Saying, why I'm going to be a victim of this. I'm going to have a why me mentality. I'm going to make excuses and ultimately let this situation define me. Or I can take the same situation and say, how is this somehow happening for me? I know it's unfair. Trust me, I get it's unfair, but how can I learn from this situation? What is the lesson? I'm a Christian, but I don't put faith in anybody. But just for my example, I said, God, what is the lesson you're providing for me that I can use to not just become a better version of myself, but eventually use the lessons to maybe help somebody else along the way, such as what we're doing right now is on this podcast. And I've always taken that to heart. And yes, it didn't just happen overnight. I didn't just have this like, oh, how does life happen for me? I had a lot of ups and downs, but the more that I've learned through it, the more I realize that every lesson in life, every hardship in life provides a valuable lesson for you to truly grow.
I love that you say that, because that's 100% my mindset, as you also know, with my own journey. And it is a mindset, and there does have some darkness in it, where you can say, how is this happening for me when I'm in this state of mind that says, I don't want to be this person that's going through this. And not that we want to say we want it to be someone else, but we definitely don't want it to be ourselves. And so within that darkness, I'm going to ask you, you'd already mentioned how much weight you had lost, losing your hair. And I'm not going to say an ego, because we all have an ego, but it wasn't even about an ego about losing your hair and your weight. It was about, how am I going to get back up? How am I going to get healthy again? And if I remember correctly, there was a time frame where you actually were in a coma. Am I right?
Yeah.
Tell me more
correct.
about that, because that's a darkness too. And especially when you're in a new relationship with someone who, I commend anyone who sticks by someone. It's not about what they're going through, but what they can do to help them get through it. I hope that made sense.
100%, absolutely. So we'll jump right to it. So actually the chemotherapy was, for me, unfortunately, the easiest part of the journey. So what had happened after was I ended up sitting down with my oncologist, and we did blood work to find out where my tumor markers were and how much everything had shrunk. And he said, hey, Matt, we have good news and we have bad news. The good news is your tumor has shrunk from 11 centimeters to 3 centimeters. Your AFP, which is your tumor marker, which was over 100,000, which in a normal range should be at about 5, is now under 100. And I'm like, wow, this is incredible news. The cancer is going away. The tumor is shrinking. So what could possibly be the bad news? He said, well, the bad news is your tumor is wrapped around what's called your inferior vena cava. Now, your inferior vena cava is basically a central vein that goes from the bottom of your upper body to your heart. He said, we're going to, unfortunately, since it's completely wrapped around it, have to have about a 12 to 15-hour surgery to remove your vena cava, to remove the tumor, and remove the rest of the cancer in your body. So for testicular cancer patients, when you have stage 3 or higher, you usually have what's called an RPL&D surgery. And that is I don't want to try and even pronounce, because there's a lot of, it's kind of difficult to pronounce, but it's called RPL&D, and it's a very intense surgery. And unfortunately, since mine was wrapped around my vena cava, it was an even more intense surgery. So we had 4 different surgeons involved to remove the tumor, remove the vena cava, and the rest of the cancer in my body. When they did so, I ended up going into the surgery at about 140 pounds. Before that, I was about 180-pound personal trainer before all this started. And coming out of the surgery, it ended up being a 12-hour surgery. I remember waking up and I had so much swelling all in my body, from my legs all the way down to my stomach, because what they ended up doing is they cut my stomach completely open from my left hip to my right hip. And, what happened was my body, I guess, went to kind of a survival mode, and it started to swell up. I was close to 200 pounds after coming out of that surgery. Wow. So what had happened was they had a draining tube for my stomach, and they said, this should get a lot of the swelling out of your stomach and out of the rest of your body. So a week goes by, I get released from the hospital. Another week goes by, and I'm thinking I'm making progress, but all of a sudden the draining just stops, just like this, out of absolute nowhere. And everything just started to shut down. I end up getting rushed back to the emergency room, gets rushed to the ER. And this is where they found out that my body was going into what's called compartment syndrome. My kidney and liver were completely failing. I ended up having 7 liters of fluid still in my body that they ended up having to drain out, which took about 3 to 4 surgeries to do that. My body completely shut down, and this is where I went to a 2-week non-induced coma. I had a cone drilled inside of my head to relieve potential brain swelling that was occurring, and I had a catheter in my chest. And I also had a catheter in my neck because they thought I was going to be on dialysis for the rest of my life. Now, long story short, in this whole scenario, I ended up being in the ICU for over 40 days. I ended up being in the hospital for over 53 days. right out of my 2-week coma, about 5 days later, they go to take out the catheter in my neck because they see that I'm starting to make a little bit of progress. And I end up having what's called an arrhythm heartbeat, meaning it was like a 0.1% chance my heart stops. They have to do 8 minutes of CPR on me, bring me back to life. I fall into another 1-week coma. And when I finally wake from there, I remember I felt almost like paralyzed. It took me about 2.5 weeks from laying in my ICU bed to taking my very first steps again. And it was 3 to 4 nurses every day helping me do this. So I had to completely relearn to walk again in this whole entire process. And finally, when I was about to be released from the ICU or after I was released from the ICU and I was ready to go into pretty much my final stages of recovery, I had about 4 surgeries in my stomach. And what had happened, to not get gruesome here, but my stitches bursted open, and I had a lot of my spleen and things were starting to come out of the stomach. They had to rush me into a 5th major surgery. They had to do what's called an open wound surgery on me, where they removed all of my abdominals and they put like a big mesh, a football-sized mesh on my stomach. And I ended up back in the ICU after I thought I was starting to finally make progress. And for me, though, this was really the turning point in my life. I remember waking up in there, and I just remember praying to God and asking, I have 2 choices here. You know, if I wasn't in rock bottom before, I'm officially rock bottom now. And please, God, just give me a way to push forward. Give me a way to go up. Because I always tell people, I say, when you're in rock bottom, sometimes this is the turning point in your life that you absolutely needed to go into that new chapter, to go into that new beginning. And that's what it really was for me. I remember getting out of that bed. I walked further than I had ever done previous to the ICU room. I finally got out of my second time in the ICU room. And after 53 days of Lauren never leaving my side, by the way, and neither did my parents. Like, when I say they didn't leave my side, Lauren, she has a job, and she would literally wake up at 5:30 in the morning, sneak in, because you're not even allowed to see me until 7, but she would somehow manage to get in. She'd see me every morning. She would go to work, and then she would come back, and she would just sit there in her chair right next to me. And I couldn't talk for probably 85% of it. So she would just sit there, be with me. And my dad and my mom, they just never left the hospital. So they were absolutely incredible. But here's really where it was really powerful. So after 53 days, I was released on March 17th of 2017, exactly 1 year from when me and Lauren had met. And I know that was like a symbol of God saying, like, this is like the person that you're meant to be with. And I think for a lot of times we maybe take certain people in our life for granted. And if you're listening right now and you know that person that no matter what you go through, no matter how much hardship is in your life, they will be there for you. And if you can recognize that person, maybe send them a message today and just say how much you appreciate them in your life and how grateful you are for them. And that's really Lauren and my parents for me. So I was released from the hospital. I wasn't able to eat or drink for almost basically 53 straight days. So I dwindled down to 110 pounds. I was close to 200 pounds. And in a matter of 53 days, I dwindled down to almost 100 pounds. So it was 110 pounds coming out of the hospital. And it was one of the most challenging moments of my life in the rebuilding process. But, you know, if you have any questions, that was kind of my whole journey with that.
Wow. Wow. I agree with everything you just said, including the appreciation that we do take for granted with people. But I also want to add to that is we also take for granted that our bodies are always going to do what we want them to do, right? And here you went through all of this roller coaster of events and things, and your body still said, we're going to keep at it. So the miracle of the body and the mind that you have, that we can always have control over our thoughts and how we want to heal and to get through whatever our struggles are, even though it feels so difficult. You had the physical challenge and you had the emotional challenge. So good for you, and for everyone that stuck by you. I think that's just absolutely beautiful. So with the recovery process, and you said 1 year, how long did it take for you to start feeling like you were getting back to the normal that you thought you were, which now is a new normal, but a functioning normal?
Yeah, I would say what got me to the point where I figured out that I wanted to do something bigger with my life was probably not until about 2 years after cancer. Because I say, in order to be selfless for others, you must be selfish for yourself first. If you cannot take care of yourself, if you cannot take care of the emotional, the mental, the physical, the spiritual side of yourself, it's going to be very hard to then take all those lessons and be able to help other people. So for me, it took me no doubt probably about 2 years to really recover myself in all aspects of my life. Now, at first, in my opinion, it first started with the mindset, working through my limiting beliefs, working through I'm not worthy enough to fully heal. I feel like, my whole life I was this fit individual, and now I'm this 110-pound skeleton, and my ego shattered. All of these things that I had to work through. But what helped me was starting by saying, what is one thing today that is going to help progress me forward? I think a lot of times in life, we want to get to destination so quickly, yet we forget that the journey is what really matters in life. If you can't learn and grow through the journey, when you get to the destination, or when you get to the place that you've always wanted to be, you'll never truly appreciate it unless you put in the actual work that's going to take to get there. And for me, I knew it was going to take a lot of hard work. So for me, it was the physical side, but I had to start with the limiting beliefs and say, I'm worthy enough to heal myself. I'm worthy enough to take these actionable steps to get myself to where I need to be. And what I started to do was here's how I started to learn to really walk again. I had a lawn chair at one end of my driveway, and I had another lawn chair at the other end. What I would do is I would take all of my effort, get myself up off that chair, have my cane, walk over to the chair, sit down for about a minute, contemplate life, saying, okay, how do I get back up and get to this next chair? But I'd just do it again. And the next day I'd move that chair a little bit further. And then I moved that chair a little bit further. And guess what? That chair wasn't in the driveway anymore. The chair started going onto the sidewalk. And then eventually it kept going further and further. And one day I said, you know what? Don't even bring a chair with me. Don't even do it. I need to do this on my own. I need to have the courage. And eventually I was able to walk further and further. And now, today, 5 years later, I'm able to go out, and I could easily go out and walk 5, 6, 7 miles if I want to. But it took small incremental progress every single day to get me to where I need to be. So it was mentally working through the limiting beliefs, then physically taking action, because if you don't take action, you're never going to actually get to where you need to be. Remember, you can do all the meditation, you can do all the inner work, but if you don't take action, then you're never going to get to where you need to be. And a lot of the times I think we try to become perfectionists, or we try to do too much before we even take action. All your answers are going to be through going through the scary actionable steps in life. I call it imperfect action, which means taking action while failing along the way. You're gonna fail. It's okay. Don't worry about failing. Don't worry about other people judging you or what they think of you. And that's actually, if they start judging you and thinking something, and you have good intentions in your heart, that means you're actually doing something worthy of your life. So for me, it took about 2 years to really work through that. And then I was finally able to say, okay, time to do something bigger with my life.
Perseverance and definitely getting trapped in your own thoughts. Before I ask you my final question and find out where you can be found, because I also know you're a speaker, you talked about how we as women are encouraged, strongly encouraged, to do our exams every year for breast cancer. With having been detected at such a young age of 24, would you say that there's that same screening that should apply to men as well?
100%. It should be at minimum once a year. I personally think even because everybody gets a physical, or you should be getting a physical 100%. If you're in your 20s especially, testicular cancer is actually most prevalent from 18 to, I believe, 36 years old. So every single year, at least once a year, in my opinion, 2 times a year. With me, obviously being a cancer survivor, I get checked at least 2, maybe even 3 times a year. But I really do recommend at least once a year you go get checked out. Ideally getting checked out twice just to be safe. There's nothing to worry about, but I think that this is the one thing I wish I would have done. I'll say it right now is if I wasn't so naive at 24 years old and would have got checked out when I originally had my symptoms, it would have been more like stage 1 instead of stage 4. Now, I think God had plans for me, and I think that there's reasons behind all of this, but I truly want to tell everyone here, don't be afraid, and don't feel like it's something that's like, don't be ashamed of going to get yourself checked out. If there's something abnormal, or even if there isn't, you just want to go get yourself checked out, go do it. Give yourself that reassurance. And I say at least once a year.
Wonderful. Now, before I ask my final question, I know you're also a motivational speaker and a coach. What are you coaching?
Yeah, absolutely. So since I've been in the health field for over 10 years now, I found that after cancer, rebuilding myself was really challenging mentally and physically. And like I said, it took me about 2 years, but I realized how much of a struggle it was. And what I've truly realized as I built 2 years ago, I started a Facebook group for cancer patients, survivors, and caregivers. We've now grown to over 6,000 members. It's a group I wish I never had to build, but it's a group that has been so impactful and so powerful in so many ways. And, what I've realized is cancer does not stop once you are a cancer survivor. There is so much that we have to recover from as cancer survivors, and the physical and mental aspect of it is something that doctors have their place, but there's also a place where they can't necessarily relate to the after part of cancer, because there's not necessarily medication or anything that you have to take. It's more rebuilding your life. And that is my objective. Is I want to say, hey, I can relate to you as a cancer survivor and know what it takes to recover your body, to recover your mind, so you can be the best version of yourself and get back to who you deserve to be, and even become a better version of yourself, and maybe do something even greater than what you thought or even imagined you could do with your life. So that's what I do as a coach, and that's what I try to share as a speaker too. And it's not just to cancer survivors. I've shared to different companies, I've shared to entrepreneurs, I've shared to testicular cancer patients, I've shared across everywhere. And really the message is your current situation is not your final destination. Your current situation should be a stepping stone towards something to help you build yourself into a better version of yourself.
You've said it so many times over and over, and I've heard it on these interviews, is the best version of who we are. And sometimes it gets us taken down to find out what that best version is. Would you agree?
I think it might be the only way sometimes. So yes, 100%.
Yes. Now, we've actually provided all along this interview how to reach you, but you mentioned a couple of other platforms that you can be found. Can you share that with us right now before I ask my final question?
Absolutely. So if you would like to hire me as a speaker, you can go to mattodespeaks.com. If you're looking for coaching, you can go onto my Facebook page, which is just Matt Ode, or my Instagram, which is Matt, MATTY_ODE. Just send me a direct message. And if you have gone through cancer, and if you are either a patient, a caregiver, or a survivor and want to join my cancer Facebook group, it's called Taking Back Your Life from Cancer. And it's my Facebook group. You just go onto Facebook and type in Taking Back Your Life from Cancer. I'll be happy to have you in it. And it's just a free group where we are all a family and all a community, helping one another to, fight this terrible disease in so many different ways.
Thank you, Matt, for all that information. And I want to thank you for being my guest. But my final question, you're not off the hook yet. I always find that this question, if it was the only question I could get to know someone in a very short amount of time, would tell me a bit more about who they are. So my question is this. You ready?
Yep.
What message would you like to leave everyone based on your journey?
Yeah, I'm a very, I love this acronym. It's one of my favorite acronyms, and I've learned it from a guy named Jim Quick, and it's called HOPE. Help one person every day. And I think we underestimate the power of helping one person, because by me hopefully helping one person stay on this podcast can then take the knowledge that I was able to provide them, and they can then go and use that to help other people. So by the time that I maybe help 5 or 10 people, or Christine, that you've helped 5 or 10 people, you technically potentially helped 100 or 200 people. So don't underestimate the power of helping one person every day. That is my goal. That is literally my motto, is hope, help one person every day. If I can just help one person every single day, then I feel like I am fulfilling my purpose in life.
Well, you've chosen a good word, because what are we on? Stories of Hope.
Yeah, love it.
Thank you for being my guest again today and sharing your journey. And I hope that whoever saw this message, it was at the right time, and if they know someone that needs this information as well.
Thank you.
Yes. For the rest of you, I want to say thank you for joining me on yet another amazing story. And I also want to say thank you to my studio sponsor, the Motivated Mind Group, your local creative agency. If you have a story you want to share, know someone who has a story, or you want me to spotlight a nonprofit organization in your community making a difference, please email me to the address of stories@christinehotchkiss.com. Until next time, everyone, I wish you well, and you take care.